One. Welcome, everyone, to yet another live stream. I'm your host, Christopher Balkaran. Folks, this is the place where we're going to be talking about things that I feel are on so many Canadians' minds. And many of us are just really scared to ask tough questions. And the question tonight, and it was in my blog. So if you haven't already subscribed to my newsletter, link in the description below. Why are there so many Indians in Canada? Indian international students, Indian temporary foreign workers. I know that's an uncomfortable question. I know that's a question that's on the minds of so many Canadians because over the past few years, we have seen a major demographic shift in this country. Perhaps the largest demographic shift we have ever seen as a nation outside the influx of Europeans after the war. There have been hundreds of thousands, millions of new temporary foreign workers, international students that Canada has admitted over the past few years, which has led in part to the government of Canada reducing the number of international students and temporary foreign workers. The reason why I bring this up is because so many Canadians are not only concerned about the number of Indian international students and temporary foreign workers coming to Canada, but that there's other issues associated with this. I've mentioned before social cohesion, but there's also fraud that Canadians are concerned with. It was a time where coming to Canada was highly lucrative and you had to have, demonstrated your skills to come to Canada to even be considered for Canada. But it seems like in the past few years, a lot of our requirements have been skirted around and people have been coming here through unconventional means and perhaps not with the proper checks in place. And in this video, in this live, I'm going to share with you, and I'm going to do this together with you. I'm going to share with you reports directly from the federal government. I've made a bunch of notes, I've highlighted things, and so we'll go through the data together. And the reason why I want to do this is because I want to show receipts on everything that I'm talking about, of course, but I also want to show you that this isn't my opinion. This isn't conjecture that I'm drawing. This is directly from the federal government in the reports that they're sharing. So hopefully in this live, we can have a robust conversation about some of those findings. I just want to also say that in 2026, the Auditor General is set to release her report on the international student program. And I anticipate that what the Auditor General will find is a lot of fraud, a lot of widespread issues, and that may change a lot of people's perspectives about the program writ large. I say all of this because I don't think this is a right conservative or liberal left issue. I think this is an all of government issue. Again, I've mentioned before that the global skills strategy was introduced under the Harper years. There was an aggressive push for more international students under Harper, but it was under the Trudeau years where we saw an expansion of the program to allow for pathways to permanent residency and citizenship. That's where we saw a massive uptake. So today I'm going to stop talking and I'll let the report kind of speak for itself. But I'm going to start and let's see what we can do here with this report. Here it is, folks. The annual report to Parliament on immigration. This was released in 2025 by the Minister of Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship. So IRCC's 2025 report. I'm going to just skip ahead and go to my bookmarks. As I mentioned before, I put in some bookmarks and we're going to go through them. All right, my first bookmark, if I can get to it, here we go. Just let this stat sink in, folks. 2024, 483,640 immigrants were admitted as permanent residents. This was in line with targets. Of these, 244 were men, 244 women, 238 is men, 30 is another gender. In 2023, 471,000 immigrants were admitted as permanent residents, which is a small 2.5% increase. 483,000 folks. That's a substantial number for Canada. And as you can imagine, this has also been enhanced with the temporary foreign worker program. So let's get into that, because this is a stat people don't want to sometimes often overlook. A total, okay, before we get to the actual stat, a temporary resident is a foreign national who is legally authorized to enter Canada for a limited period. This is the government's words. Again, I'm not making this up. A total of 1.6 million, and that's with an M, temporary residents were issued permits in 2024. This includes study permits, work permits, and temporary resident permits. Of these, 687,000 were new arrivals as work or study permit holders. Over the course of the year, 3 million individuals held valid permits to enter or remain in Canada as temporary residents. Again, I'm going to pause there for 1 second, folks. 3 million. That's nearly 1/10 of our entire population. 3 million. And this has obviously been a concern for so many. So we'll keep it going. But I just want to pause there just so that, again, when I talk about these numbers and I talk about, Canadians should be concerned, it's like it's not me making this stuff up. This is real. This is from the government's own data. Okay. So 1.6 million temporary residents. I've mentioned on previous videos, like, where did these jobs come from? Right? Like, it's just wild. So here's where we should really turn our minds. Again, this is from the government's own report. Top 5 source countries of citizenship for permanent resident programs. It's no shocker, folks. India, oops, if I can zoom in and it doesn't take over the whole screen here. India at 94,000. So for economic immigrants, that's where you have to show that you have the qualifications, et cetera, to come to Canada. India, 94,000 of approximately what, like a few 100,000 there is from India. I can't do math quickly, but it's the lion's share of all our economic immigrants. Family reunification, India, 31,000 of approximately, what's that number? Probably like 60,000. Over half family reunification. Resettled refugees and protected persons, India is not there because I don't believe they're going through any wars that would be characterized as resettled refugees and protected persons. Human and compassionate and other. I mean, if you look at these numbers, they're so low, right? So economic immigration and family reunification, right? That's just one. If you keep going down, top 5 source countries for citizenship for temporary resident programs. Mexico, still very high, 22%, 42,000. India, very close at 21% at 39,000. Followed by the Philippines, Guatemala, and Jamaica at much lower percentage points. International Mobility Program, 209,505 admissions, 29% of the International Mobility Program. And folks, just as a reminder, the International Mobility Program is the program where employers do not need to show that there is a labor market impact assessment. They don't have to show that they're trying to hire Canadians. Now, I say all this because look at the numbers of India in relation to the other countries. 209,000 international mobility. The closest country next is Ukraine at 111,960, and we can all consider that an anomaly because it's largely probably due, most likely, to the Russia-Ukraine war. And so we can imagine in subsequent years, this number will go down quite dramatically. So the next closest country would be Iran at 41,000 or the Philippines at 36,000. I mean, Even if you were to add up Iran, the Philippines, and China under the International Mobility Program, it wouldn't even come close to the number from India. Now, again, I'm not like an auditor by any stretch of the imagination, but automatically my mind is already thinking, what is going on here? Why is it that in every category, India is dominating? Study permit, 188,465. 36% of our study permits go to India, followed not even closely by China, Nigeria, the Philippines, France. You add up these numbers of China, Nigeria, Philippines, and France, it doesn't come close. Of the 309,000, India represents 188,000. Visitor program, 576,000. Again, the closest is France, 528. Pretty close. Okay. But just look at these categories. And I'll go back here to the top 5 source countries for permanent residency. India dwarfing other countries for economic immigration, family reunification. Temporary residence programs, study permit program, IMP, and TFW, India just dominates, except for the TFW where we have a little bit more people from Mexico. Here's where it gets also interesting. In 2018, 3.3% of Canada's population were temporary residents. By 2024, that number had doubled to 7.5%. Remember what I said earlier, 3 million, nearly 10%. It's here in writing. An unprecedented, this is the government's words, folks. Again, I'm not making this up. 7.5%, an unprecedented rate of growth that put pressure on housing supply, the healthcare system, and schools. Canada's new government recognizes that the system is no longer sustainable, and we determined to make it so, and we are determined to make it so for everyone who lives there. Okay. And then, of course, the minister talks about the new plan, and the new plan will reduce the target for temporary resident emissions from 673,650. Just get that number. I mean, these numbers are so wild for a country of our size. Remember, 40 million people live in Canada. Of the working age, what is that? About half would be of working age, maybe less than half. And then we still have unemployment that's reported, which is, I think it's around 8 to 9%. Maybe it's a bit lower now. But generally speaking, 20-ish, let's say we have 20, I'm going to be very generous here, 20 million people. Let's say a few million are unemployed. So we're at 18 million, let's say 17 million to be safe, because there's also underemployed. So we have 17 million working Canadians. And I would actually argue that number is lower because unemployed, underemployed is not always reported accurately as well. Just because you're of working age doesn't mean you're actually eligible to be employed, disabilities, etc. So let's drop that to, let's say, 17 million. Shave off another couple million for unemployed, underemployed. We're talking about 15-ish million Canadians working, right? 15 million, that seems reasonable, right? So 15 million working, and there's 673,000 temporary resident emissions. I mean, that is madness. That is like almost 1 in 15 of the working population in Canada. Again, I'm being very generous with those numbers. It's probably lower, but in relation to temporary foreign workers, it's pretty wild to see the numbers. The fiscal cost is of reducing is 168 million over 4 years and 35 million, and it represents the loss in fee revenue, etc. So why am I sharing with you all of this? Because what happened here, folks? Like, what happened when the government itself, and this is something that I really want us as a country, as a population to talk about. Like, what happened to us? You know, why is it that we as Canadians haven't been able to talk about this in an open and honest way? Why is it now in 2025 we're doing this like the federal government is doing this. Oh, it went too far, too fast. Why wasn't this discussed in the moment when these new aggressive targets were being thought of at cabinet and unleashed onto our country? Like, that's the part I really struggle with. Like, how come there wasn't a voice in the room that was like, this is a bit aggressive? Even for our country, this is aggressive, right? And so I get that employers are pushing government to get more temporary foreign workers. I get that colleges and universities depend almost exclusively on international students. I get that. That's the pressure these groups place on government. And the government isn't funding post secondary the way it did years ago. I understand all of that. But you see, the government and cabinet, they have to weigh what interest groups are telling them to do with their own mandate and what's best for the country itself. And again, I've mentioned this before, and I feel like I sound like a broken record, but like young people are still not employed at high rates in Canada. And that really is upsetting when you consider how many young people are unemployed, underemployed in this country. It's pretty wild. And of course, there's concerns about like widespread abuse in the system, fraud. When you start letting in so many people from one region, naturally you're going to get more questions about what's going on. And I want to share with you a little bit more about some of this data because it is pretty wild. So let me get my other report up. Actually, before I do, let me share with you this piece. Where did it go? I hate when I don't have my links. Yeah, let me share with you this screen because this is pretty wild. So I'm just gonna get out of this. Check this out, folks. And we can all have our own opinions. But again, I'm sharing with you what the federal government is saying. Okay. This is October 2023. Um, Defrauded students and genuine students impacted by fraud task force. Earlier this year, cases came to light in which some current and former international students began to face enforcement action following investigations into the submission of fake letters of acceptance, LOAs, when they previously applied for study permit. The cases were identified via tips and intelligence probes conducted by the CBSA. Over 2,000 cases were initially examined. Cases included foreign nationals from India, 89%, Vietnam, and the People's Republic of China. The cases involved unauthorized consultants providing their clients fraudulent letters of acceptance from various designated learning institutions in Canada in support of study permit applications. Of the 285 cases under review, 135 different immigration officers across 9 visa offices assessed the initial applications. Okay, data is tracked manually. Da, 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 da. Okay, data is preliminary. Where are the findings? I had something here. It was right here, and now I can't find it. Um, okay, well, it was here, and now it's not, but I'll find it. Nothing like a live stream fail. No, there was something about, and I'll get it right now. Um, it was pretty bad, and it was the number of cases of fraud from India when it came to international students. And so this is pretty wild. So it actually showed that the majority of fraudulent cases were from India. And it's not to say that Indian international students come here fraudulently. It's that they reviewed, I think that of the 200 cases they reviewed, 89% were from India. And those were ones that they had suspected there had been fraud. So there seems to be an overwhelming response or prevalence of fraud within the applications from students coming from India. Again, it's not to say that students from India are engaging in fraudulent activity. It's that there is concerns about fraud from international students in India. I know that's a bit of a word salad, but it's to show that there's real concerns there. And I mentioned this earlier in the live, but the Auditor General will be providing her report on the international student program. And I imagine there's going to be a lot of findings in that report that will really shock Canadians and most likely will set the tone for acceptance of international students moving forward. It may be reduced, and maybe the feds need to bump up post-secondary funding or transfers to the provinces to bump up post-secondary funding. Who knows? But I imagine that substantial changes to the international student program will be coming after the Auditor General launches her report next year. That's the power of these reports, folks. It can really shape public policy. But while we're at it, let me share with you. I've got a bunch of reports and they're all over the place, but let me share with you um, the report that does have that did look into this in some more detail. And so let me get that up because this one is actually interesting. And folks, I do have receipts here. So this one is from the Canadian Immigration Lawyers Association, the state of immigration fraud in Canada. Now, this was released, I believe, just this few years ago, or this year. But I want to start here. Canada's immigration, and this is from CILA, has faced growing challenges due to rising incidents of immigration fraud. An IRCC refused over 52,000 temporary residence applications due to misrepresentation in the first 6 months of 2024 alone. This compares with some 46,000 temporary residence applications refused due to misrepresentation in all of 2023. Why has the rate of misrepresentation findings increased by 100% over a period where temporary residence applications have only increased 25%? It is possible one or both of these variables are at play. One, there are an increasing number of bad actors that seek to exploit the immigration system for gain. Or two, IRCC and Canada Border Services Agency integrity officers are in fact detecting more misrepresentation. And so there's a string of, as you can see here, recommendations on how Canada can mitigate this fraud and strengthen its immigration framework. But before we get there, folks, again, I'm just going to jump to page 11 because one thing that the CILA does is they do case studies. And I'm not going to go into every case study here because I think it's very important we read them for ourselves. And definitely I'll leave a link in the description for this one. But I want to point you to case study number 2. More than 700 Indian students faced deportation from Canada after discovering that their admissions offer letters, from Canadian designated learning institutions were fake. The fraud came to light when the students applied for permanent residency, prompting CBSA to review the documents used to issue their study visas. CBSA determined the admission letters were fraudulent. Most of these students arrived in 2018 and 19. Many have since completed their studies, obtained work permits, gained work experience, only to find themselves at risk of removal due to misrepresentation. The affected students have applied for study visas through the Education Migration Services led by Brijesh Mishra. Mishra charged exorbitant fees, including tuition, and has since disappeared, leaving the company's office closed. The incident was condemned by the House in a statement released on June 14th, 2023. Among the regrettable aspects of this episode was IRCC's lack of digital tools and processes to flag the fraudulent letters of acceptance in the first place. And folks, I just want to let this land with all of you because I'm sure some of you today saw that incidents of fraud in Canada are up because there's just not enough administration to process it. And so that's what's got me so fired up tonight. So concerned, I guess you could say, because I see this all the time. I see when government puts forward ideas like increasing immigration and they aggressively do it. And defenders say it's about Canada's multiculturalism, we need it, et cetera, et cetera. And then this happens. And I think politicians don't understand that even if fraud was at a lower percentage, even if the numbers were lower than what they are that I've shared with you tonight, Canadians are more concerned than ever about immigration today. And a lot of people say, oh, it's because of, Trump, the Trump effect, et cetera. Countries are becoming more nationalist. I don't know that to be true because I look at our policies over the past few years about how we've allowed in so many temporary foreign workers and international students, specifically from India and Canadian. And this is changing our entire communities, our cities, our smaller communities, our greater, greater areas outside our municipalities. And naturally, Canadians have all types of questions that are not getting answered. And they're not being answered in a meaningful and respectful way where they're being treated like adults. And when Canadians and when adults have legitimate questions and they're not getting answers to them, they retrench, they go online, they go on Reddit boards and forums, and they really get into details about how there's all these Indians and they're taking their jobs, their kids can't get work, etc. All because the government did not explain what it was doing. What it was doing. What was the rationale to increase the numbers? And I have a graph somewhere, and I'm sure I've shared this millions of times. Um, uh, it's wild. When you look at this visually, it is wild. So let me just share this with you so that you can see it. And again, it's not like I could not make this up even if I tried. Um, but the numbers are just astonishing. And they're astonishing for many reasons, but number of temporary foreign workers by program 2022, the numbers speak for themselves. I mean, it's just numbers are wild, right? And like it just keeps going up. And if I share with you, let me just get this down for a second. If I share with you this graph, which I think is the most emblematic, I think, of all the graphs that I've seen. And to think that like people didn't think that there would be consequences with this is just mind blowing to me. But if you look at this graph in particular, temporary foreign workers in Canada have increased by almost 300% to over 1.2 million under Trudeau. And forget the Trudeau part, 1.25 million. I mean, again, how large is our working you know, our economy? How many Canadians are actually employed full time? I mean, this represents such a massive number of our entire workforce. And to think that the government just did this and didn't expect there to be ramifications is absurd to me, right? Like, of course there's going to be ramifications. Of course this is going to upend and change communities. Where are these jobs coming from, and why are temporary foreign workers, international students being given priority over Canadians? That's certainly the sentiment that Canadians are feeling. And then on top of that, we have every single category, family reunification, um, study permits, economic immigration. I mean, India is just crushing every single. And look, I think the reason why is because India, again, massive youth population boom, 260 million people between the ages of 15 to 24. But you can't tell me that 15 to 24-year-olds are the only ones applying. There's people who are older and they're still getting through at higher levels. And I'm not saying that there's this like conspiracy to get more Indians in Canada. I do think that India has these unique advantages that other immigrants don't. They can speak the language, English. Um, whether or not we can debate proficiency, but English is taught at an early age. And stable banking. Canada does require one to have stable banking with money in the bank account. India does have that, which is interesting because, in many ways, Canada's immigration system cancels out people from parts of the world where there's corrupt banking system practices, and they're not being taught English at a young age. They could be literally the hardest working people that would be beneficial to Canada, and we kind of cancel them out through our immigration program. But anyways, I wanted to share these numbers with you because often I find when I'm having these conversations with family and friends, I share these numbers and it's like people can't believe the numbers themselves. But this is directly from the federal government. And even the federal government, even the Liberal Party of Canada is now recognizing they went too far. My question is, why wasn't there honest discussion during these decisions about the pros and the cons and what's going on? And I don't know if the federal government understands this or not, but this decision they did over the past few years has actually created a cottage industry of Canadians who are absolutely fed up with immigration, who are creating a lot of content online about, Indians taking over their communities, over their jobs. And if we're not careful in Canada, this can lead to a lot of really, really negative social animosity, division. This can lead to a lot of othering. And I just want to end this live by saying it's not the Indian international students' fault. It's not the Indian temporary foreign workers' fault. If any of us were in their situation, we would 100% be, mortgaging the house to send our kid on a one-way ticket to Toronto, right? Like, I'm sure you would do that. I would definitely do that because my thinking would be it was so hard for me to get to this point. Our government's not the greatest. There's a lot of corruption. My kid is unemployed or underemployed. They can't get into the Indian Institute for Tech or other prestigious universities in Delhi or Mumbai. So my best bet is to sell my house or sell my land, show the government that I've got 30K in the bank, put my kid on the one-way ticket to Toronto, and I pray that he or she is gonna be successful and send money back to me and the family here, and eventually sponsor us because it's not that he's only going there for education, he's going there to live permanently. And we have established networks in Canada, in Toronto. There's a big community of our community there. He's got a lot of people he can connect with. That's what I would do. And all of us probably would do the same thing. So I want us to get away from the person at the end of the line here, but the system that's been set up is one we need to constantly be questioning and asking ourselves about. So I'm going to end the live there. I've been speaking for a long time, but I really hope you subscribe. I'm going to create a digital product just explaining all of this in more detail, but I want to share this live with you because I think it's so important that we're talking about this. Like, share, subscribe, folks. You can hear my voice is getting raspy. I love talking about this stuff. It's so important we as Canadians do that. Hit that like button, subscribe, tell your friends, subscribe to my newsletter, download my digital products. There's one in there that's free, but they're all pay what you can. So pay what you can and also download the free ones too and subscribe. Okay, that's it for me. Subscribe. All right, take care, everyone. Have a great rest of your night, and I'll catch you in the next one.